Welcome to the recap zone. Today I will discuss the storyline of movie with the title, The Skin I Live In. In a stately home of an experienced plastic surgeon named Robert Ledgard, a woman named Vera had been locked up in a room and had lived for years inside the room, as Robert's guinea pig desperate to develop a prosthetic skin that could withstand burns and insect bites. Vera did not volunteer to do so, was kidnapped and treated as a special prisoner. The necessary things were sent in an elevator to her room. Nobody knew where him was except Robert, and one of his assistant was Marilia. Robert continued his studies until he succeeded and gave a presentation in a medical symposium, he saying that his skin had been tested on an echimic rat, and had proved to be as successful as he hoped. When Robert spoke personally with a medical president, he revealed that he was conducting transgenesis experiments on humans, but he was forbidden to continue his research because it was deemed illegal, and that if Robert continued his research he would be reported to the community. One of Robert's colleagues was quite pleased to hear of the ban, since then Robert could resume his work and forget about his research. Unfortunately, Robert didn't want to stop. He was obsessed with making Vera just like his late wife. It is known that Robert's wife died long ago, neither from an accident nor from the burn his wife suffered, as Robert so often put it. His wife died of suicide from depression, unable to accept her poor self after an accident. After Robert was banned from continuing his research, whether or not he should have done so in secret. Robert had actually admitted that the experiment was complete. Vera was perfect with her new skin that was perfectly smooth and impervious to burns or insect bites, but still Robert would not let go him. He didn't care if some people said he had to put an end to Vera's life to ensure security. Marilia, who was an old maid in his house, suggested the same thing to Robert. She was afraid that Robert was in danger of letting Vera continue to live in that house. Robert did not listen to Marilia's words and insisted on defending Vera, and for the safety of the secret experiment, Robert asked Marilia to fire the other servants. Robert then left Marilia and Vera locked in the room. Shortly thereafter, Zeka, who was Marilia's unwanted son, came out dressed in a tiger costume. Zeka begged his mother to keep him hidden for a few days at Robert's house. Apparently Zeka committed a robbery at jewelry store. He won't leave the house until Robert returns. Zeka was planning to blackmail Robert. Zeka then saw Vera on the screen connected to the CCTV in Vera's room. He wanted to meet Vera, but Marilia forbade him and forced Zeka to leave by threatening him with a gun. Zeka then resisted and managed to tie and shut her mother's mouth. Afterward, Zeka began poking around the house looking for Vera. After searching all the rooms on the first floor, Zeka then went up to the second floor and found Vera's room, the one next to Robert's room. The door was locked and Vera said she didn't have the key. Zeka returned downstairs and forced his mother to give him the room key. When Zeka got the room key, he returned to the second floor and managed to open the door. After the door opened, Vera tried to escape, but Zeka managed to catch her leg. Zeka thought that Vera was Robert's wife and he finally raping her. Not long after, Robert returned home and saw what had happened. Robert became very angry and eventually killed Zeka with a gun. After Zeka's body was disposed of, Marilia then cleaned up the blood trail in Vera's room that was the site of the murder. Marilia told Vera that Robert and Zeka were actually brothers, but Marilia never told them. Both were born to different fathers, and Robert never knew if Marilia was his mother. Robert had a better fate than Zeka, because Marilia's employer was willing to adopt him, and indeed Robert's father was the owner of the mansion who had an affair with Marilia. Robert got a better life. He was still raised and cared for by Marilia in that magnificent house. While Zeka has a not-so-fun fate, he lives a homeless life after being abandoned by his mother. His job is to rob and smuggle drugs, much different from Robert, who got a good education, went to medical school, and managed to marry a woman he loved very much named Gal Ledgard. Marilia resumed her story in the garden while burning a blanket covered in blood. She said that Zeka had been to that house 12 years ago, because him was wanted by the police. Zeka and Gal then met and decided to run away together. Unfortunately, their car had an accident and caught fire. Zeka managed to survive the accident and ran away. While Gal actually almost died, but Robert managed to save him with a body full of burns. Because his love for his wife was so great, Robert tried to repair Gal's body to be like before. He works day and night without stopping, doing research so that Gal can get plastic surgery to restore her physical condition. Since the accident that happened to his wife, Robert has closed all light access to his house, and removed all the mirrors so that Gal cannot see her physical condition. Marilia reminisces about those days, and says that her life was like a vampire in that house. What Robert did finally paid off. Gal's condition gradually improved, until finally when Gal heard her daughter named Norma sing a song that she used to teach her daughter often. Gal gets emotional and walks towards the window to see her daughter. When Gal arrived at the window, she saw her reflection in the window pane. She could not accept the condition of her body, and finally she decided to end her life by jumping from the window and fell right in front of her daughter. The incident really damaged Norma's mentality to the point of depression. Coincided with the end of Marilia's story, Robert came and took Vera back into his room. That night with Vera beside him, Robert suddenly dreamed of his past that happened about 6 years ago, when he was attending the wedding anniversary celebration of one of his relatives. Norma also participated in the event. She looks very happy in contrast to the actual condition that requires him to take medication to stabilize the mental health disorder she has experienced since her mother's death. Vera also dreams about her past events. In her dream it was told that Vera used to be a man named Vicente. A young man who works in his mother's clothing store, and likes to flirt with a girl named Cristina who also works in that shop. That day Vicente plans to infiltrate a wedding party with his friends. Unexpectedly at the party he met Norma. Like everyone else at the party, they were both under the influence of drugs. Vicente walked with Norma to the park. They were making out and seemed oblivious to what they were doing, until finally Norma heard a song sung at the party, a song that reminded her of when she had to witness her mother's death. Norma had a panic attack and started screaming. Vicente tried to stop Norma's screams, but Norma bit Vicente's hand so that Vicente unconsciously slapped Norma until she was unconscious. Vicente didn't continue his dirty intentions. He went back to tidying up Norma's clothes, and then ran away from the place. Vicente didn't know that Robert saw him that night. Feeling revenge for Vicente's actions against his daughter, Robert tries to track down Vicente and manages to kidnap him. Vicente was detained and chained in the basement without lighting. Vicente's mother reported her son's loss to the police. When the police managed to find Vicente's motorbike at the bottom of the cliff, they informed Vicente's mother that her son was probably dead and dragged into the sea. Even so, Vicente's mother is sure that her son is still alive. Vicente's search has not been stopped and continues, because Vicente's mother urged the police to continue the search until the body is found. Meanwhile, Norma, who is traumatized by her increasingly severe mental condition, doesn't want to be touched by any man, even her own father. Every time Robert came, Norma would go into the closet and cry. Norma could no longer know her father, she only knew that Robert was the perpetrator of the rape. In a different place, Vicente suffered from being deprived of food and water. He ate and drank from his own feces for days. Vicente can't even remember how long he's been in that place. Robert only came to see Vicente a few weeks later, and occasionally brought him food and drink. Vicente never knew what Robert wanted to do to him. Vicente's sanity began to be disturbed, because he was cooped up in a dark and lonely place alone. In the end Norma died by suicide in the same way her mother did. Robert could not accept his daughter's death. He poured all his madness and sadness on Vicente by having sex reassignment surgery. He removed Vicente's penis and replaced it with a plastic vagina. The operation was not carried out by Robert alone, he was assisted by his colleagues. None of Robert's colleagues knew that Vicente was the victim of a kidnapping. They only know that the operation was because of Vicente's own will. After the operation was successful and Vicente came to his senses from the anesthetic, he was immediately informed of what had happened to him. Vicente then became very shocked, but all of that had already happened. Vicente was no longer placed in a dark and damp basement, he was now placed in a spacious and comfortable room. He still couldn't believe what had happened to him, until he had to look at his own genitals in a small mirror in his room. Robert then came and asked Vicente to slowly stretch his new vagina. Over the course of 6 years, Robert physically transformed Vicente into a replica of his late wife. Vicente went through many painful processes physically and mentally, until he finally turned into a woman named Vera. His hair is now bald, but almost all of his appearance has changed to that of a real woman, with a feminine voice and has a female posture. He once tried to run away, threatened to kill himself, and he literally slit his throat. Luckily Robert immediately saved him, and fixed the appearance of Vera alias Vicente to be more perfect. For years Vicente tried to keep himself sane and stick to his true identity as a man. He refuses to be a girl and becomes Robert's toy. With the hair on his head starting to grow, he really does look like a girl. Ordinary people would never think that Vicente, who is now called Vera, was once a man. Vera alias Vicente began to feel bored being cooped up in his room. He started watching TV channels that broadcast yoga programs, and began to practice doing it to achieve calm. He also watched more art-themed stuff and started to find peace. Outside the house it looks like Robert has brought Marilia back after being away for 4 years. Now Marilia is assigned to look after Vera alias Vicente, who has been locked up in the house for years. After Marilia's arrival, Vera alias Vicente also started writing on the wall. He noted how long he had been in Robert's prison. Back to the present, the unique and strange relationship between Robert and Vera alias Vicente is established. If anyone knew their true story, they would probably say that Robert was a very crazy man, and that's how Marilia felt. She doesn't believe in Vera alias Vicente. Marilia was very disappointed when she found out about what was going on. Robert gave freedom to Vera alias Vicente to leave, as long as Vera alias Vicente promised never to leave Robert. The plan that Robert thought would go smoothly to live with Vera alias Vicente, turned out to be not what he expected. Fulgencio is one of Robert's colleagues, accidentally reads a news in the newspaper about the missing Vicente, and he remembers him as one of the genital surgery patients. He used to work with Robert. Fulgencio then accused Robert of falsifying the Vicente agreement, and conducting experiments on it. Vera alias Vicente, who had just returned from outside, overheard their conversation. He then tells Fulgencio that he is the missing Vicente. But instead of asking to be saved, he defended Robert and said that he underwent the operation of his own free will. This seems to prove his loyalty to Robert, when in fact Vera alias Vicente only arranged a plan for revenge. He still misses himself as a man named Vicente. That night, Vera alias Vicente tricks Robert and shoots him with a gun. Marilia, who heard the gunshots, immediately burst into the room, pointing a gun. Unfortunately she only found her dead son on the bed. Vera alias Vicente, who was hiding under the bed, immediately shot Marilia and managed to kill him. Vera alias Vicente's revenge has finally paid off. Vera alias Vicente then left the mansion in the middle of the night. He returned to his hometown to meet his mother. With his new identity as Vera, no one would recognize Vicente. When he returned to his mother's clothing store for the first time since he was kidnapped. He looked around at his mother's shop very changed. He then walks in crying and tells Cristina that he is Vicente. He explained about his kidnapping, forced sex change, and the murder he committed in order to escape. Of course Cristina didn't believe it. Vera alias Vicente then showed a dress that reminded Cristina of their conversation 6 years ago, and finally Cristina started to believe. When his mother entered the room, Vera alias Vicente again revealed his true identity to his mother. He said that he is Vicente, who has now turned into a woman named Vera. Explanation. Vera is a man who tried to rape Norma, Robert's daughter. Vera's real name is Vicente. Out of revenge, Robert kidnaps Vicente and turns him into a guinea pig for his personal experiments. Robert changed Vicente's gender and made him a real woman in physical form. Robert turns Vicente into a duplicate of his late wife, who committed suicide due to depression, with her physical condition after an accident. Vicente does not forget his identity, he only changes physically and still remembers his original identity, as a masculine man without any sexual disorders. Although Robert treats Vicente as a woman and changes his name to Vera, the relationship between the two of them is solely because Robert still can't forget his late wife. He sees Vera as a shadow of his late wife, without realizing that Vicente, who he considers to be Vera, is actually holding a grudge, and waiting for the right moment to avenge all what Robert did to him. That was the discussion of the movie storyline of The Skin I Live In. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.